So many people who voted for Joe Biden did it because they view Trump as a one-time anomalous fluke and the complete and total embodiment of evil. He is hated and loathed by the left for his cruelty, anti-science, offensive, anti-reality, nihilistic, sociopathic, or narcissistic presidency. However, he is and always has been the tip of the iceberg, and without another figure in politics, he not only would have never risen to power in the first place, but also would not have done so much harm to the nation or survived his impeachment. That man, of course, would be Mitch McConnell, probably the most evil man in America, and unlike Trump, he's actually smart. He too is nihilistic, cruel, and sociopathic, but he prefers to stay in the shadows, away from public view, so the president can take all the blame and downplay his power. Unlike the Sun King, where public exposure was what fueled Trump's power, for Mitch, it's obscurity and invisibility that is his superpower, making people forget him. I highly recommend the NPR Embedded series on him. It's very eye-opening as to just how much he desires power over all else, and might makes right to him. He has no ideology at all. He is the perfect rules lawyer, and has used that to make the rules worse and worse over his time in power. He even won his first election in 1984 by misleading unions into thinking he would do one thing using framing, and then saying, "I never actually said that," which was technically true in the letter of what he said, but convinced them through the spirit of what he said, and after that the incumbency effect kept him in power to this day. It also doesn't help that Kentucky has literally the lowest voter turnout rate of any state. This is much like how Vladimir Putin isn't technically wealthy at all. During the decollectivization of the USSR, Putin helped create the oligarchs by favoring loyalists over other people instead of in a free market manner, and they all know they would be nothing without him, and he has all the dirt on them and can take them down for fraud anytime he wants, or just assassinate them. It's because of this that while Putin only has a small government salary and a modest home, he can stay at any oligarch's mansion in luxury anytime, anywhere, because he owns the oligarchs themselves, meaning all of their property is actually his. It's because of this that he is actually viewed by many as the richest man in the world, and Russia is the biggest mafia-run nation in the world. Because of his humble means and appearance on paper, his brainwashed masses always view him as being great, honest, and incorruptible. It's the local government and evil oligarchs that are the people hurting the nation, often never making the connection between the two. So he always has a human sacrifice stable, ready to trot out if they dare defy him, making him look like he's tackling corruption. Putin gets the advantages of Trump's public exposure and Mitch's hidden power and wealth. He is what you would get if you merged the two and had unfettered power, and the Trump-Mitch hybrid would strip the US of all its basic democracy if this person did exist in power. Luckily, this person does not exist in politics. So far. Mitch McConnell is known for his radical, free-market, pro-rich stance, including the, at the time considered, hyper-radical claim that money was free speech. During the Reagan-Carter race, both candidates ran their election purely on government funds for the election. Under Reagan and then Bush, PACs and donors began forming thanks to campaign deregulation, and no Democrat could win until Clinton, who became a master at working the system in spite of hating it. Both parties believed this money in politics was a serious problem, and in 2002, the McCain-Feingold Act was passed, pushed through by John McCain and Russ Feingold, and voted for in a bipartisan fashion by both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. McCain and Biden both viewed campaign finance law as important and continued to look for ways to curb it. But then the Citizens United PAC tried to use privately donated money to air an anti-Hillary documentary prior to the 2008 primary, which broke campaign finance rules. It went to the Supreme Court, where people like McCain and the Democrats defended the McCain-Feingold law and made active statements to the court to uphold the law. However, Mitch, now Senate Minority Leader, actively testified to the court as to why money was free speech and corporations were people, and why the McCain-Feingold law broke the First Amendment, ignoring the fact that if money is free speech, then the poor have no voice at all. In 2010, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Citizens United, causing a tsunami of dark money to flood politics, and the GOP swept state and local elections thanks to a cash injection that the Democrats had zero power to counter. This gave them control of gerrymandering and used the new GIS software to run a plan called Red Map, giving them up to 17 seats in the House they shouldn't have had, and just as much, if not more, in the state's House and Senates. But there was no law against this. Prior to this occurrence, after the 2008 election, with Obama, the newly elected president, the now minority Senate leader, Mitch, basically told everyone, "We're not going to work with him." Literally anything he wanted to do in this massive economic catastrophe of their own making, they were not going to help him with. He stated his goal was to make Obama a one-term president, and after half a century of working across the aisle in Congress, there was nothing but gridlock. Pelosi had the votes lined up for single payer, and Obama was ready to sign it, but Harry Reid, thinking that Mitch would eventually come around, refused to kill the Senate rule from back when the two parties were essentially the same in the 50s that took the old filibuster and allowed it to be invoked with no effort and to be secret if one senator wanted to call it, and it would require 60 votes to allow the vote to be voted on, even though the Constitution puts it at a simple majority. While it requires a simple majority to overturn it and claim it was unconstitutional, Reid believed the Senate would return to the good old days of bipartisanship, and was worried that it wouldn't be there for the Democrats when they needed it, and only a two-thirds majority should be allowed to change the Senate rules, even though the elimination of pork barrel spending and partisan primarying now gave the GOP zero incentive to work across the aisle, and we got the Heritage Foundation version of healthcare to appease the 3 Republicans who would break the 60-vote threshold. Just a note, this no-effort filibuster was almost never used prior to Mitch McConnell, except on incredibly important divisive issues. Mitch's plan was simple: sit on his hands, break government, and then let the president get the blame, or at least blame both sides for it, and it worked. Obama did everything he could think of to get Mitch to negotiate, and it never went anywhere. This appearance of failure of Obama and the utter contempt of Congress caused wave after wave of primarying out anyone who wanted to work across the aisle, and after 2010, when the House was claimed by the GOP, Mitch put into effect the next phase of his plan, holding spending hostage, which caused government shutdowns and short-term spending bills like clockwork, something never seen in US history because it's economically dumb under the fake pearl clutching of the debt that they caused since Reagan. Clinton lowered it and was on track to have us debt-free by 2012, but then Bush spiked it with Medicare Part D and 2 endless wars he put on the nation's credit card, along with tax cuts for the rich. And now, along with the continuing resolutions which caused the taxpayers billions because short-term contracts cost more than long-term ones, in the middle of the worst recession since the Great Depression, when we should spend on infrastructure as labor and materials are super cheap and people are paying the government to borrow their money and get people back to work, the GOP instead forced Obama to cut deficit spending down to a level not seen since right after World War II, and they were still claiming he was spending the most of any president because he was still technically raising the debt. It had just slowed down like crazy thanks to an anemic deficit during a recession, and the Great Recession lasted literally years longer than it should have, only coming to an end around 2016, where Trump came onto the stage and he took all the credit. At that time, a deregulation of opioids law Mitch had pushed through under Bush started seriously showing its effects, and people were dying at a rate of 50,000 per year from opioid addictions, while the Sackler family raked in billions as the most successful drug dealers on the planet. This created a hopeless nihilism among the rural populations. Both sidism was rampant thanks to Mitch's abuse of Congress from complete inaction. Mitch refused to help secure funding for election security and refused to work with Obama about the fake news and misinformation campaigns Russia was hitting us with. Citizens United had so demolished the Democratic Party that Hillary came in and had to try and save it with her and Bill's ability to work the system. And since no one ran against her but Bernie, it made it look like the system was rigged and dirty, and her participating in money in politics instead of shunning it made her look to have rigged the election. Even though that's legally impossible. I even talked to burners online convinced that she was happy that Citizens United passed and believed it was a law she voted on and not a court case. She could have gotten all of her money from individual donors, just like Bernie, because nationwide, candidates are one candidate with a nationwide pool of donors. Citizens United hurts down-ticket races, way worse, where candidates there have only a tiny pool, and super PACs can muscle in and force them out. So Hillary had to do all the sleazy fundraisers and help down-ticket candidates. That made her appear to be chummy with the 1% in post-Occupy era, and her having charities with the appearance of conflicts of interest, and the fake Benghazi scandal, and the fake email mess-up, and the misinformation and both sidism and fake news depressed voter turnout, and she died by a death by 1,000 cuts, all created by Mitch for the past decade, allowing Donald J. Trump, yes, that's Donald Trump, to come in and normalize fascism, racism, and xenophobia. He cut ties with all our allies, rolled back pollution restrictions, making us sicker and the planet warmer, cut taxes on the rich on the nation's credit card, forcibly separated kids from their parents, promoted and perpetuated pseudoscience, doing what appeared to be everything humanly possible to make COVID-19 pandemic worse, killing 240,000 people at this date, the most in the world, from his neglect, lies, misinformation, and he told people not to wear masks, and Mitch stood by and just focused on pushing through federal judge after federal judge that he had refused to allow Obama to rightfully have voted in his final 2 years, and then jamming through 3 Supreme Court appointees while passing the least amount of laws in the history of Congress. During all this mess, Mitch has done everything to help Trump while staying in the shadows. It's been very easy. He blocked all actual relevant witnesses in the impeachment hearing, refused to allow an investigation in the Kavanaugh hearing, and got literally every single thing he wanted. The man is giddy with how much he got away with and divided the nation.
I was shocked that former President Obama left so many vacancies and didn't try to fill those positions.
I'll tell you why. I was in charge of the of what we did the last 2 years of the Obama administration.
I will give you full credit for that. And by the way, take a bow. All right, that was a good line.
Now, after the 2020 election dust is settling and the insanity is coming into focus, Mitch not only won his Senate seat, but is looking to have a Senate majority again. He literally couldn't be in a better position. He will be able to get rid of the stench of Trump out of his party while benefiting from his still existent polarized popularity. The courts will essentially kill bills he hates, and now all he has to do is sit on his hands and refuse to work with the Democrats again and generate more partisan hatred and division and both sidism and let Biden take all the blame for his gridlock. It's the best thing that could possibly happen to him. During the 2016 election, Mitch said the only thing he cared about in a presidential candidate was that he could hold a pen and sign bills, and he got that and enabled him at every step. And people still don't hate him or are motivated by him as much as they do Trump, even though without him, Trump would have never come to power. So what do we do about him? The man who is essentially America's Putin, always a fixture, always in power, while appearing powerless, creating a dictatorship of no in the past decade, and orchestrating ways for oligarchs to get more and more power, stripping power and wealth from the average American, and blaming the presidents, the stable sacrificial scapegoats, just like Putin. Well, right now at least, the Senate isn't called. There are 2 runoff elections for Senate January 5th, which would give us the narrowest of majorities, that is, if Schumer uses the power given him and all Democrats are on board, could allow for the no-effort filibuster killed and allow them to actually start passing real legislation again to fix all the damage to the middle class and democracy that Mitch has so carefully crafted in the shadows. There's a lot of hope for these candidates to pass, as Stacey Abrams was able to flip Georgia blue for the first time since the 90s, and at least one of the candidates, Reverend Warnock, won with a strong majority, just not 50% of the vote. There's also a lot of reasons to worry, as Ossoff didn't have a majority against the incumbent, Sonny Perdue. And it's a runoff, so the voter turnout is usually very, very weak. If you can give money to these campaigns, do so. Remember that Biden has promised to forgive all student loans from people from households under $125,000 and forgive $10,000 for all else, and give people 2 years free of community college for all. So for the price of a few student loan payments to these candidates, it could be a great return on investment if they win. Should that fail, our next chance is 2022, where once again a lot of reason to hope, but also a lot of reason to worry. Due to just random luck, 10 Republican Senate seats in possible swing states are up to flip, while only 3 Democratic seats are up that could be flipped. On the downside, it's the first midterm, which always goes poorly for the president in power because people only pay attention to the president, so we're more likely to lose seats in the House. So these next 2 years are going to have to be focused on getting our ground game under us, or Biden's term will end up like Obama's last term, gridlock and him getting all the blame, while Mitch giggles from the shadows as he dials up the partisan divide.
The Senate went on vacation. I mean, you just don't do that.
If that fails, 2024 will be devastating for us. 12 swing Democratic seats are up in the Senate, while only 1 flippable Republican seat will be open. Without protections such as the Voting Rights Act, getting money out of politics, and efforts to fight against misinformation, this next decade is going to be just as bad as the last one, and another Trump, but maybe even smarter, will be able to press on those cracks in democracy and utterly shatter it. We haven't escaped fascism, we're on temporary probation for it. All the factors that caused it are still there, rotting in the nation and still festering. It's up to us to work our asses off and make Moscow Mitch just as villainous and divisive in the minds of the American people as Trump was. That said, there is one other way Mitch could get toppled, aside from a mystery disease that caused his weird black hands, that is purely of his own making. If you haven't done so, I highly recommend you watch my video called "The GOP is Statistically a Criminal Organization," where I cover all the scandals and crimes and abuses of power the GOP has done compared to the Dems in 2000 up until July 2019. The differences are staggering, and one of them that I mentioned is Elaine Chao, the wife of our American Putin, Mitch McConnell. During the early Trump administration, cabinet member after cabinet member were reported to the press as blatantly and serially abusing their office for personal gain. Ms. Chao was no exception. As Secretary of Transportation, she funneled more money to Kentucky for road construction than any other state to help her husband get reelected. That should have been equal for every state unless allocated by Congress. On top of this, she continued to hold stock in her family's massive road construction business, and while we never did get an infrastructure package, one of the only things I agreed with Trump on, he would hold infrastructure weeks, and every time that happened, stock in her company would rise. She was also reported to have used her position to try and get her family lucrative contracts with China, the thing the Hunter Biden scandal was supposedly about, yet she did it very openly and with zero shame. Lastly, there's the weird case of the Russian aluminum company deal. That is a Kremlin proxy that was struck to open up in Kentucky. This created jobs just like with the injection of transit money, helping him get reelected. All of these things are pretty shady dealings that a functioning Justice Department not staffed by Trump lapdogs will almost certainly be investigating over the next few years and see if there is enough evidence to press charges. This could cause his removal, and the Democratic governor, Andy Beshear, could temporarily replace him with a Democratic senator flipping the Senate. And unlike what Trump has done, the new Justice Department will not be reporting potential charges until they have an actual case with sufficient evidence thanks to his powerful status. This could well be his undoing, taking him down as the corrupt oligarchist he is. However, until that happens, we can't rely on that, and we must focus on the next 2 months and then the next 2 years, or Mitch will just be the dictator of no he has been for the past decade, ensuring we get to the point that another smarter Trump grabs the torch of fascism and we will really lose our democracy.
The House passed a bill in May, and the Senate went on vacation. I mean, you just don't do that. You negotiate.